Billy, you seem to have completely mastered the fingerboard. What can you tell us about the shapes and the patterns you use to connect the neck up?
Well, I doubt if mastered is the word, but
oh, looks like it.
Stumbled upon some form of understanding of it. When I play a particular scale, like we touched on in the last video, I have certain patterns that I use, like for a G major scale. For me, when I play, again, to reiterate, when I play a pattern in one position, like for the G major scale, like I did right there, I do all the notes that you can do in a G major scale in that position, which would also include this low F sharp, even though it isn't really part of that scale, just because it's contained in there, and it's a note that your finger can go to in that scale, so I do it. So actually a G major scale for me then would be...
Right.
So I get them all in there. So now, another type of scale, the only other type of scale that I know of actually is a pentatonic scale.
Well, wait a minute, though. You could get minor off the major. So.
Yeah, because it's major and minor I consider pretty much.
And you're pretty fluid with both sounds, major and minor, and you're playing.
Well, that's pretty much because they're both really the same thing.
Right, so you can parlay that.
Yeah, just as a G major scale.
Right.
In G is a minor.
Exactly.
Is an E minor, a form of the E minor modes or scale.
Right.
You help me out with this.
So you have both facets of it contained in that scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now the pentatonic is kind of major and minor free. It's kind of an oriental.
Right.
So what it is, actually, when I do it, I also try to do it all the way across the neck. So we're doing 2 notes per string.
Let me ask you, because it's a 5-note scale, that's why we're limited to basically 2 notes in the positions as opposed to 3.
Good point. Actually, I forgot all about that, but you're totally right. So now if you take part of that pattern, put it together, that's your G major chord. So if you're playing guitar and you had 2 extra strings there, it would be a for real G major chord. So now you know that is a pattern of a chord, and it's made up of those component notes. Now if you take the pattern that that chord makes, in this case we'll move this finger up to there.
Right.
Even that sounds rather dissonant, it is. It's a non-resolved something or other.
Well, it's a G with A in the bass.
Yeah, it's a G with A in the bass.
Needs resolution, though, you're right.
Yeah, right. New Year's resolution. Anyway, so there's a G major scale. Now if I take the top notes of that pattern, becomes the bottom notes of the next position. Now here, there's so we're back up to the octave. So what I'm doing there is I'm trying to show the top note of each position of a pentatonic scale makes a pattern, which in itself is a chord, basically.
Right, of some type.
Yeah, I see that I don't know the names of.
It could change depending on what's behind you, harmonically.
Yeah, so okay, that's your department, I guess.
Okay.
I'll just play it, you explain it. But the song that I did with Mr. Big called Had Enough.
Right.
When I was learning the modes on guitar, the E minor mode, it actually formed a chord by the lower parts of it. And when I strummed that chord, and I actually did all of the chords made up of that mode, it actually seemed to make a reasonable facsimile of kind of a song-y type of thing.
Okay, well, let's see what that's like on the guitar, if you wouldn't mind demonstrating that.
Yeah, hand me that little boy over there, and I'll see what we can do with it here. Anyway, the idea, when I was practicing guitar, learning a couple things to write some songs, and I write a lot on guitar, but which sounds like an Allman Brothers song, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. It has that country flavor to it.
Anyway, so I noticed that that chord that made was part of all those notes there. So it actually became...
Yeah.
It became part of the...
So you derived those chords from the mode.
Right, so it's an E minor kind of mode. So that fits all any pattern. I always wonder how these jazz guys got these amazing
Uh-huh.
chords all over the place, because they understand scales so well
Exactly.
that they can put any configuration of notes together and come up with an amazo chord thing. So you see these jazz guys doing all these comping chord stuff, and I always wonder, how in the world did they ever learn all those chords? Well, they just basically know their stuff, and they know their scales, and they know their modes, and they know how to put them all together in lightning fast, and
that relates exactly to what you're talking about, connecting all the shapes.
right. So what I'm doing basically is just like, so now if I take like a G major, the pentatonic version. So I know if I'm in G. All those.
Ah.
It's all in G. So if I'm playing in the key of G, it's easy to find a spot to go to, because you know that's your spot. And then you just do variations, part of one, part of another. So
Now, do you visualize the note G somewhere in those shapes?
sometimes I do. Like, for example, G major. If I got that note in the middle, this is kind of the simple way I did it when I first started, but it actually still holds true to this day, for me anyway. 2 whole steps here, 2 whole steps here, and 2 whole steps on the string underneath. If that's your root, you know that if you got a string above it and below it, and it's ridiculously simple, but it helps you to get a start on the idea of having a pattern and having some place to go. So now, similarly, any of those notes, of those 9 notes, work with that.
Various combinations can be created. Yeah.
All basically in the key. You can, and of course I'm stretching a point, and I don't understand it musically enough to really explain it in those terms, but I'm explaining it in pattern terms.
Exactly.
So now once you know that there's your, so that pattern works up here, or if you have enough fret.
But what note is your reference note to? The
one
G there.
The G in the
Uh-huh.
middle. So now you know, anytime you have a key anywhere, again, ridiculously simplistic, if your key is like, you know, that, you know that if you're in a major, you know that your pattern around that is such. Of course, there's a million other patterns around it within the context of a major scale. But
So all these things are movable, and they remain symmetrical.
They remain
Meaning
relatively
that,
the same. So if you have a particular note, and it's a major scale, and it starts and has that note there in it, you know that you've got all those notes around it that you can go to play if you so desire.
So it's really a matter of being selective then with the notes. Once you've accumulated a lot of them, you become selective with what you play out of those patterns.
Exactly. So now, instead of just doing it rote pattern thinking, once you're used to moving in those patterns, and you can kind of just step back and let that little machine you created with your hands kind of direct it from like a remote control thing.
Like directing the machine, the analogy you made speaking earlier about how you use scales.
Yeah, basically you just create a hand that does all the moves, and then you sit back and kind of with your little remote control, like you would a little race car or something, and make it work around. That's pretty much how I play, because I don't really think about the scales I'm doing. I don't think about what's going on. I'm just kind of reaching into the cosmos or the ozone or whatever zone that it happens to be, and trying to find some areas there that kind of relay what I'm feeling and thinking at the time, or you know, on stage or in the studio, whatever. But to give you an idea, all those notes that I played are those 9 notes that work around this G, G included. If you're just...
Are there some specific areas of movement that are better than others in connecting these shapes?
Well, you get used to certain moves with your hands. Like for a long time, for many years, that was my move. So whenever I would solo, if it was an E minor, which is the relative minor to G major. would really be stuck into that pattern for a long time. So I finally forced myself to break out of it and make myself do a lot of other things. So the idea of it here, the final analysis of what I'm talking about is, once you understand a shape, and you understand that from one note you've got all these moves you can go to, all these different notes, and you have one stable spot to find is that is your note. That's the key you're in. Now usually, like when I first started bass, it's like, okay, I got a G here. I know this move. Paul Samuel Smith and the Yardbirds.
Exactly.
Then we used to do an up an octave. It's like, oh, a whole different one. So you saw for like 2 or 3 years of my playing goes just all in that one pattern. Then after a while you learn to expand it more, and you have more patterns and more option notes to go from G. You can go to there, there's another one, there's another one, there's another one.
So are these shapes you would commonly call on in improvising?
Yeah, I guess in the beginning when you're first starting to understand improvising, I guess you would work with shapes.
Right.
Eventually you get to the point where you're not thinking shapes, you're thinking music. You're not thinking what scale you're doing, you're thinking I have an emotion and here it is via the bass. I look at learning the shapes and learning all the spots on the neck to understand, similar to in language, because music is in a way a language, learning a little bit of vocabulary. So you get kind of it's a building block. Sure, when you're in school you got to learn spelling and vocabulary and sentence structure, and it's a drag and you hate it. And that's what this kind of is. Learning sentence structure, similar to learning the structure of the patterns. But once you know it, you can speak like we're speaking now.
Right.
And this is what music should be like.
Communication.
Just like I'm talking to you. Exactly. Where it's just effortless. I'm not thinking pattern. Let it fly. And all that comes, the fluidity of being able to just play something. Play something, you know, just to play it, comes from just years of learning what in the world is going on in this space right here. It's a very small amount of space, but you have to understand the patterns and the tunings and all the things that different emotions and major, minor will give you and everything like that. Once you know that, then it becomes music again. So
it's all contained in those sets of intervals that we'd spoken about, their orders, and finally the patterns, how they recur.
Yeah, that's the technology of it.
Right.
In real life, you want to play it. So that's instructing or explaining, this is not real life. This
you have to absorb it and recreate with it.
This is just the foundation.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for building strength and endurance in practice periods, particularly, you know, designed for stage use?
Yeah, whenever you have a move that you're doing, you have to pull it apart piece by piece. Find the weak spot and just isolate that. Like for me, for example, sometimes this finger lags behind the other ones. So I'll sit there and just do that finger
by itself?
For a while by itself, and then in context with that one. And then all three. Then reverse, and then reverse that way, and just do those two together, and then by itself, all different strings and every different combination, till you get that finger up to its normal strength again. So when you're having trouble, sometimes it's really hard to pull a lick apart because it goes by real fast, and you're not sure really what's wrong with it. So do it real slow, take it, you know, like...
How slow would you do it, for example, if you had to demonstrate that?
Like, oh, you're doing a lick that's like...
Do it slower and harder as well, push harder.
Yeah, so you can kind of see which, because as you hear in there's a certain skip notes, and you really analyze it close, it's not quite right. When you're playing live a lot of stuff is blowing by and you don't really notice it. And you can have a lot of inconsistencies in your playing that you're not aware of. So a lot of times just to stop, slow down, go sit in a dressing room or a quiet room and work it out and find the weak spot and pound on it. I guess it's basically, in order to prevent hurting yourself, if you know a little bit about, I don't really know anything about bodybuilding, any kind of exercising thing like that, but if you talk to somebody who knows, and they'll tell you, like, you know, you need to do a little warm-up period, and then work on it, and then back off, and work on it again so you don't overstrain it and everything, you know. So it's important.
Tendinitis or whatever.
Yeah, so just keep it's common sense, basically.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's move on to your thoughts on applying licks and parts of techniques to song. What can you tell us about you know, the theory behind keeping it in check so that the song comes first and the
So you don't overplay.
Yeah, basically.
Boy, you got the wrong guy for that, huh?
But it works. No, I mean, you keep yourself in check within the song context.
Yeah, if you listen to Paul McCartney's playing, he's playing all over the place. Tim Bogart, Jeff Berlin, Geddy Lee plays pretty busily. But it's a matter of, again, what we talked about when I was talking about patterns and stuff. Once you know the neck really well, you can move all around. If it makes musical sense, it will work. And if you know your stuff, because I've seen a lot of bass players also just like flying all over the place, and where's one? But 90% of my playing is...
It's in the pocket. You're aware of the pocket.
You know, it's just right on, trying to keep the song happening. You get your spots to do it.
Right.
But try to, you know, to stick with what you're supposed to be doing to make the song sound like the song. So I would suggest for a young player to just, you know, play it with a band, make it work, and then add the frosting later.
Exactly. Now, what's your concept behind the secret notes that you're often reputed to play?
Ooh, secret note reputer.
Yeah.
Well, basically, it's just kind of a humorous term for moving the root note around underneath what the basic root of the song, the chord you're playing. Simplest example of it is when you're like doing the famous rock change, which is Stairway to Heaven, Million Judas Priest, you know, the millions of. Say the root note is E, go up to F sharp, and then to a G.
Aha. So it's like substitute bass notes or other notes other than the root.
Right. So instead of so that works because those notes are in that chord somewhere. But that's the simple version. We do now we're doing live Blame It on My Youth. I'm like a for the chorus part. So
Right.
when I go Blame It on My Youth, I go up to the
Aha.
what is that? It's a B. I remember the first time I did it, Eric looked over and like, hey, what was that? Do that again,
Interesting
you know?
sound.
Yeah, so it's just when the guitar moves one way, you just move the other way, and you kind of make it automatic. That's basically the idea is just a kind of a rock perversion of what Bach does with moving bass lines.
Exactly.
If you want to get an idea what that is, just get a well-tempered clavier, which is just pieces by Bach with just solo piano or harpsichord. I prefer it with, because you can hear it much better. And you'll hear the bass line moving all over the place underneath the same melody line, and suddenly the melody line does not sound the same anymore because the bass line is different. That's the idea behind it.
Redefined.
Yeah. So whenever we're, you know, a lot of songs we're doing.
It's in Merciless too, isn't it?
Yeah. In just before that part.
Paul goes to a D sharp chord. Yeah. Right.
Oops, to the E. Well, I did that one night too.
Yeah.
But and whenever you make a mistake, just play it again. It'll sound like you meant to do it. So
That's a good rule to keep in mind.
I've done that many times, and then left it in the song because it actually worked after a while. So.
Do you ever practice that at home too?
Making mistakes? Oh, that's all I practice.
Getting out of them?
Oh, that's all I practice there, right.
Well, now in our first video, we established a core of pretty strong fundamental ideas. Let's talk about how you apply some of those ideas.
Okay.
I'm specifically referring to the beginning of the Had Enough song, where you play an intro bass solo.
Yeah.
It contains a lot of your interesting techniques.
When I first started seeing guys doing sweep things on guitar,
Right.
Paul Gilbert and people like that, Yngwie and stuff, doing sweep stuff, it was really intriguing, but as a finger player, so it was a little difficult for me to get, you know, so I learned a couple. But for me, that was a little awkward, so I had to think of a way to do kind of a sweep-sounding thing
Right.
that I could play while I'm standing up, while I'm running across the stage, while the monitors are feeding back, and you know,
Yeah.
all the accompanying pitfalls that occur when you're playing live. So one of the things that came up was a way to. It's not a full, a wide bandwidth sweep, but it's a more compact version of it. But for me, it's way more effective. And what that is I take like an E minor kind of figure there. So what I'm doing there basically is three things. I don't know how I came up with this, but it just kind of popped in. Kind of a flamenco.
Oh, like a roll.
Go backwards. So I've got that basic, that plucking thing there. So there's your E minor. And then you hammer down with that, hit with that, pull off, pluck, pluck.
Similar to the Rasguiato technique.
Boy, if you say so. I would extra cheese maybe on that. But it's a bunch of techniques all together. Just hit the wrong note. So what I did is I went.
And you're outlining the E minor and C major sounds.
Because that's what the chords of the song.
Exactly. So you're thinking the chords of the song already in the intro to your solo.
Yeah, because it kind of gives you the feel, sets it up, you know, so it's not such a big surprise when the song comes in.
Which is important. It should be integrated into the song, right? It shouldn't be a standalone solo that takes away from the song.
Can be. In this case, it isn't.
Yeah.
In this case, we stick with the song.
It's more structurally related.
Yeah, it can be structured. You know, there's no real rules as far as that goes, but some people like to try and keep things as much continuity, thread of continuity, which is cult of personality. So we got this thing here in E minor. I could resolve it by hitting the high E there, actually, but I'm hitting the D. So what I'm doing here on the C part of now when I'm hitting it, I'm hitting a fifth here.
Right.
So then it's a kind of cool kind of
ending with two tapped fifths in a sense.
Yes. So it's
yeah, that is a combination of techniques.
Yeah, so that you have about three techniques in all. Now, what somebody could do with that probably from when they take it off this tape and use it, there's all kinds of chord patterns you can use.
Right.
There's all kinds of ways you can do that. So once you get that technique down, we can do that pluck. There's all kinds of variation you can do with it. A lot of times when I show people something or explain something that I've played, I'll come back and see some guy like about a year later, and he's like gone way off in left field and did all kinds of things that I never even thought of. So hopefully everybody that could pick up some portion or this whole thing, you know, a year from now, it will become their own, and you can do all kinds of stuff all down the neck with it. That's just, I do a couple variations on it too in my solos, but for the sake of time, that's basically where it comes from.
Would you show us the tap-on technique you use in Addicted to That Rush?
Yeah, that's basically the thing starts out with like a trill. With the left hand doing a trill, probably go like that's about like average speed. Some people do way faster, some people not as fast, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I managed to bring this one around and get it in between. So when it's going, it becomes just a blur of notes.
Right.
I stop, halt as a thing, and then we do that.
Oh, wait a second. Could you slow that down
Sure,
and break that down a bit for us?
Because it's really easy. There's nothing to it, really. It's very simple. A lot of times you see stuff go by fast, you think, oh, it's impossible, I'll never. But it's all so simple. It's almost embarrassing for me to show it because there's really nothing to it. That's basically all there is to it. So you're just taking the same move and just kind of moving it around within the framework of the key that you're in. Then, next string. Then.
You almost have to be in two places at one time, though, don't you?
Yeah, because a lot of what passes for speed and agility is just basically the ability for one finger to get out of the way of the other one so it can do its thing. Because I'm never ever going any faster than, my fingers don't move any faster than for hammering on. So when you see, a lot of notes are going by, but it's not a lot of movement. The actual movement I'm doing is not a lot of hand movement, but it's just a coordination of the two. It becomes kind of a natural flow to it. And when you slow it down, take your time and really do it slow, strong, so all the notes are even. When you speed it up, it becomes just kind of like turning on a faucet. It really kind of flows. Stuff like that.
Wasn't there a phrase in Addicted to That Rush after the solo that you talked about once as far as a good one to develop strength?
Yeah, the second one, when Paul and I do the second part of it, that's
the one, yeah.
it's really hard because for guitar players, the strings are lighter, and it's a lot easier to just kind of roll off the strings, and a lot of sound comes up. For bass, you really gotta actually pull off that note there, which is kind of tough. Oops, there's that note again.
It's built into the bass.
There you go.
You know, that occurs to me that you're using shapes again.
Exactly. Now, all the stuff I said earlier about shapes applies here. G major, which is the key we're in. And then I forget what chord it goes to from there, but that's basically the...
Go back to the chorus.
That goes into the...
Right.
But
which reminds me, you are also known for using chords a lot.
Yeah.
So you just played a couple. Could you tell us a little bit about the chords?
Yeah, when I'm playing
style you've developed.
Yeah, when I'm playing live all the time, instead of just hitting a really hard part that's gonna hit an A note, I always hit the whole as many A notes as there are on the bass. Why not? Because I've always played like 3-piece bands, and as much noise, as much sound you can get in there, go for it. So a lot of endings, instead of just a big, instead of that little, hit the whole thing. As many notes that work in E as possible. So that helps to kind of bring a 3-piece band, an extra invisible guy along. So for bass, as many chords as there are on any other instrument, only you're going to have to work with 4 notes. So the basic major, minor, suspended, and then any variation thereof. But understand with the bass, to play a chord on it, you're going to have to really to stick with with fifths and octave sounding things, because you get into these that's not going to work really loud with a super bass amp. It's going to shake all over the place. It's not going to really work, unless you're playing by yourself and it's quiet or something like that. So you have to always temper the idea of using an unusual chord or something with the idea, is it really practical, useful, and does it sound good? Right. Rather than trying to think, oh, technically it works, so I'll do, it doesn't always work. And when you're out in the audience watching and you don't know anything about bass or guitar, you just hear something where, somebody looks at each other and goes, this doesn't sound good. They don't know why, but it's just because you have to temper that with a little bit of, what is that, taste? Something
like that. Now, how did your solo bass, the bass solo you actually play, evolve?
Well, we used to do a song, Mr. Big, we used to play. Did that song by Free in
Right.
Palace in the old band. And he used to have this real long. I'll be playing. I would hit that note though. And it's just a little bass solo in between those changes. So one night I told the guys before I went on stage, it was at the Poorhouse West in Hamburg, New York. And I told him before when I said, look, when we get to the part, Mr. Big, I'll just look over, I go, 2, 3, 4, and just stop dead, and I'll just go.
They'll lay out completely.
You'll
You'll just keep going.
And then I'll cue you to come back in. It was like, oh, here we go. This is 1972, maybe, or 3. And sure enough, I stopped that and went to this, all these bass things. I did a few Bach things that I've been working on and learned, you know, and some things that I'd worked out in other songs that I was doing behind that people that hadn't noticed yet, you know, because it was in context of other songs. I just counted them back in, 2, 3, 4, and we ended the song, and that was basically the first time I ever did that.
And it went over.
Yeah, it worked really good. Hendrix did that. I mean, with the unaccompanied solos,
Sure.
he's the first guy I really heard doing unaccompanied solos.
Sure.
So it was kind of, he laid the groundwork for it, and.
Like Star Spangled Banner, things like that, you mean?
Yeah, things like that, where we just go wailing away and stuff like that. And then after a while, I'd like be doing, you know, some of Mussorgsky's, you know.
Aha.
You know,
Right, pictures at an exhibition.
all the little things like that, throwing all in the little solo thing. And it was really funny because it was rare for guitarists to do it back then. For a bass player, people were completely. Some people didn't like it at all. Hey, we can't dance with this, you know. So, you know, those people eventually weeded away, and we just drew more of another kind of people.
They kind of went off to disco, huh?
Yeah, exactly. They tore the stage down, put a mirror ball up, and that was the end of that. But yeah, that's just basically how it worked. Then I would just do pieces of songs and things. And now it's kind of evolved to a point where I just flail away, and I got some guidelines as to what I do. And solo is sometimes it's very much like what I used to do a long time ago. Sometimes it's all new. Try and be a little improvisational, but right now we're out touring with Rush, so in front of 15,000 people, you don't necessarily want to take a big chance, but it's fun if you take a little bit of a chance, you know, try something new you've never done before, you know.
Does it have a structure, though?
I play
loosely.
Yeah, I play some wild stuff. I back it down. I play some quiet stuff, and I come back and do some more stuff. You know, and within context, at some point or another, there's various things that I've done throughout my whole life, and every night I'll always do something that I haven't done before or I haven't tried before, some combination of things. So it's always different. The solo is always different, but it has basically the context of, like a lot of classical pieces, you start out with the main theme, you back off, and you do a couple sub things, and you come back in with a big grandiose finish. You know? So that's pretty much what it is. And then we go right into Addicted, and the solo now with a little part, and then Pat comes in and does the drum things, and Paul comes in and we trade some stuff off, and that's our story side to truth.
Now, another extension of chords that you seem to use a lot is the idea in NV, that one section in your NV solo where you tap chords on.
Yeah, that was back in about 1983 or 82 even. I don't even know where it came from. I was just kind of, I was doing holding a chord and doing a little trill on top of it. There's a D major chord. I found out that all those notes there kind of worked. So again, looking at the simplistic point of view that I did and still do sometimes. Now I made the chord a minor, which means this note does not work. This has got to go.
Right.
So it's. That was an accidental move. When I first did that, I had no idea. Another accidental one. There's a C chord here, and I'm playing. Actually, it's a G major chord over a C.
Yeah.
See how that works?
Exactly.
A simple ascension like that. The fingering is kind of tricky. I saw when I did a clinic in Japan, I saw a kid try to do that, and he had the whole thing, but he had these fingerings that were all like,
oh, really?
all over the place. But it's actually, again, a lot of times when you hear something, it sounds more complicated than it really is. When people are watching me play, I know they have a puzzled look on their face, like going, I'm hearing all these notes, but he's not really, doesn't really look like he's doing anything. Because I'm really not. I mean, it's just a way of economy of motion, like we talked about last time.
There's more logic, maybe, in what you're doing than what they're expecting to hear.
Yeah.
They expect it to be tricky, in other words, so they're looking for the tricky way of executing it.
Right, but in actual fact, when you're playing live, you want to keep it as least tricky for you as possible. Because you could probably do some histrionics and acrobatic kind of moves there, but when you're, like, running across the stage, it doesn't always work. So I try to do things that really depend on strength. You can really get a really strong, hard tone on that aren't so weirdly esoteric that it's going to be difficult for you to just summon up at any given time from your imagination.
What are some of the other key points that you like in your NV solo?
There's a couple like...
Now, how did that develop,
that
idea?
was taken from the Van Halen.
Oh, Mean Street.
That thing there, which I don't want to play too much of to encroach upon Eddie's thing. When I first saw him doing that in 1980, it was part of a solo, and later on he put it into the intro of a song. An amazing piece of music, and it's actually, I think, from what I understand, taken from a
bass
slap
figure.
Because Eddie's a great bass player and a good drummer too. It helps out his guitar playing. That's why I urge bass players to learn a little bit about guitar and definitely a lot about drums because it helps out your playing a lot.
So remember that.
Remember that. So so that tapping thing, because I never did the thumb thing. I can't. I'm just not. I practice it once in a while, but so many other guys have it so much better than I do. Why even bother? You know, just call
you
them
probably
if you
could, but you got priorities.
Yeah, I would like to because it's really great. But so I just did a lot of tapping with this finger naturally because I never even really knew about the thumb stuff because most of the stuff I played didn't require it in most rock bands. Just a way of you're hitting on the octave.
You're getting so much sound, it looks so light, the way you're playing it.
Yeah, it's kind of a touch that you get. Your finger actually kind of bounces off. A lot of guys like hold it on there too long. It's just kind of a way of bouncing your fingers, both on the right and left hand.
Now, what's happening in your left hand at that point? Aha.
And,
so this upper note section has a pedal kind of effect. It stays put
you're
while the other notes below it change.
You're kind of getting that chord there, so you got to kind of stick within the realms of what works with those three notes. So
it gets pretty elaborate.
Yeah, so now anybody watching this can take that and do any kind of chord structure in the world they possibly conceive of.
It should be in one key, similar key, chord changes related.
Or experiment. Can honestly say I've never played that pattern before in my life before this moment here.
And the open strings are a part of it, of course.
Yeah, so you can, the variations are limitless that you can do with it. So, and it originally came from, that thing, and it's just going to extend it all over the neck. So there's a lot of ways you can approach tapping and hammering, and I try to encourage people to be unlimited. And every time you come up with something, understand, like for a long time in my solos, in the old days, I would always just... So what that is. Kind of a raking, half hammer technique here. Get a real fast thing out of it. Now,
and you're barring under there too, as well.
Yeah, I'm holding these notes here, and barring here too. So look how little motion there is for all those notes. And then just about a year ago, I finally realized, hey, why don't I try another chord, only the same technique?
Yeah.
So there's no limit to how many variations you can do. And now somebody out there that has a better grasp of chord structures than I do can do the same technique. Because once in a while you get into a spot with your hands where they do a certain thing and you do it really well. A little bit of variation, you can change it around. So once you got a real good technique move, learn how to make it more musical.
Right.
Where a lot of guys get this technique thing and they just do technique, 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 you know, all over the place. We realize that that's like your building block. Like when I first did hammer-ons and stuff like that, after a while I realized, oh, you can move that around, that hand, and you can move this hand around too. You can do extra finger. And so there's pretty soon, you know, the whole world, everybody knows what the hammer-ons are all over the place.
Right.
So the same idea with it.
What about the area of string bending? You'd mentioned that briefly, but could you get a little bit more in depth about your technique, how you do it, and tips on executing?
Yeah, for a bass player to bend strings, a lot of guys don't do it because the bass is heavy strings, but I have a custom set, and I have the G string a little tiny bit lighter, just a tiny bit, 2/1000ths of an inch, I think is what it is. And the E string is a little heavier, because the E string usually is very floppy on any given set of strings. So if to bend strings, like I'll always try to get as many fingers on that string as I can, and have them all bend. So it takes all the pressure. As you can see, little holes that are created. If I hold this note for a second here, you see little holes that are created in my fingertips.
Groovy.
Yeah, very groovy. Ooh. Anyway, so those little groovy grooves there, they indicate that the pressure is equally distributed over all three fingers. If you're just doing it with one, you'd have all that pressure pushing on one finger, which may be uncomfortable. And some guys probably can do it that have a lot stronger hands than I do. Sometimes I'll even get all four behind there.
All four even.
But what I generally tend to do when I get behind something like that, I try to keep as many fingers on it, and I kind of roll my fingers down and push it up that way.
So some movement's coming from the wrist, apparently, too.
I'm actually, good point, because I never even realized that.
It's kind of a leveraging, almost.
Yeah, I'm kind of the vibrato part comes from that. I have these top frets scalloped down on these basses, too, to make a little easier to get underneath there, because on these higher notes, we're going to need a lot of pressure to bend them up. I tend to bend down underneath and push up.
So you're in the scalloped area.
Yeah, for these here. It's not always necessary to do that. I just happen to do that for myself.
It's a little bit more comfortable?
It seemed it. You know, it seems like it makes it, because you don't hit any wood there like you would down here. Hear that wood scraping up against it, because I do a lot of high bends on the bass to try and get it to the highest note you can get out of the instrument. So generally the G string gets bent up. The D string is optional. I don't do too much bending on the D string, obviously. And then the A and the E are bent down. And now the E string can really.
Boy, that's quite a long ways.
So that's out of tune too now. But you can bend the E string quite a bit. So the lower strings are looser by nature, and the higher strings are tighter. So you kind of have to get underneath these, and you can pull these down.
In the last video, you mentioned a little bit about pinch harmonics, but since then you've elaborated a bit on them, like in the Blame It on My Youth break that you play. It almost sounds like a guitar. Could you talk a little bit more in depth about the way you play artificial pinch harmonics?
Yeah, like as I said in the last video, I guess there's no way to actually hear them now if you hear the record. A lot of it is limited. You can't really do a lot of fast picking because you got to. That's what as fast as you'll get, as I'll get anyway. Somebody else probably do faster. But anywhere on the string, there's a harmonic in there. So when you're playing live, you get that real. It's like our sound man in our shows uses that to kind of judge where the bass becomes sometimes the second guitar for moves like that while Paul's playing the chords and stuff. I'm doing that.
What would it sound like if you played it without the harmonics, just for contrast? And then with the harmonics? Yeah.
Something like that.
Makes it much more interesting.
Yeah, because it's
colorful.
If you don't really need the note for a
root or something?
Yeah, to establish. And it's also, if you did play like that, it kind of gets to make a lot of frequencies there. So we just kind of cut out the low frequencies and just go for the real high ones. So it doesn't get in the way of what the guitar is doing or what the singer's singing in a way. So
Are you going for specific placement, though, when you play that? Or?
I think I accidentally get specific placement because what I do is my hand's here, so when I go below this pickup, it's kind of
you visualize against the pickup in relation to the pickup? Sometimes?
It's just kind of a natural thing that my hand falls it because you can't do it over the pickup because then I don't have room to reach underneath, and here this big pickup's in my way, so we got one other option right here, so that's kind of that's where it kind of ends up, natural selection kind of.
Yeah, that's great. I've seen you do something that I've never seen any other bass player do, and that's bend the neck while you're playing it. Could you give us a little bit of a rundown of what you do?
Yeah, I think I first got that. I'm sure a lot of other guys do it. Maybe you got to get out and see more bass players there.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think I got it originally from Pete Townsend, because like the beginning of I Won't Get Fooled Again. See him shake his neck around a little bit live, and I think, God, it's got to work on bass, forcing guitar. You know, that's generally the rule of thumb. So a lot of times when I do like a harmonic, I'll just kind of can bend it, and actually you hit the low note. It's quite down to a D.
Yeah.
But we got to be careful how your bass is connected here.
And now, what's the actual mechanics behind what's going on?
A lot of it has to do with how the strap is together. That's why I used to stretch my strap out all the time. I'd be playing, everything would be fine, like I talked about again in the first video, not to be redundant, but how if the strap would change its size, the angles of my hand would change as the bass moved down away from me as the strap got longer. The reason why the strap was getting longer is I was doing all these. So what I'm doing is the strap goes all the way around me, connects here and here, and I'm pushing up against it, and this is the fulcrum.
That's holding in place. Wow, that's quite a change. You can really see the strings go away.
Far down the neck, actually. Boy, if this broke right now, that'd be. So it's kind of a way to simulate. I was going to say simulate the vibrato arm. We used to do like any Hendrix kind of. Get those little, there's some of that in the NV solo too. As a matter of fact, at one point you hear it going crunch, crunch. It's actually the wood and the screw kind of starting to pop out of the bass because I was in the heat of the moment there. I was pushing really hard on the bass. Sometimes live I'll just push as hard as I can. And the only thing wrong with it though is it sometimes picks the strings up off the pick or moves them up away from the pickup so it's not quite as loud.